Who here would consider yourself a movie buff? I've seen quite a few movies in my lifetime, but until I watched this clip, I didn't realize what they all had in common. Take a look.
You just don't get it, do you?
What?
Oh!
You just don't get it, do you, Heward?
You don't get it, do you?
You really don't get it, do you?
You still don't get it, do you?
You really don't get it, do you?
You don't get it, do you?
You don't get it at all, do you?
You just don't get it, do you? You don't get it, do you?
You don't get it, do you?
You don't get it, do you?
You don't get it, do you?
You don't get it, do you?
You don't get it, do you?
You don't get it, do you, Charlie?
You don't get it, do you, Father Kiernan?
You don't get it, do you, Omar?
You don't get it, do you, Finch?
You don't get it, do you, Carl?
You don't get it, do you?
You guys don't get it, do you?
You don't even get it, do you?
Don't get it, do you? Oh, I get it.
I never realized that "you just don't get it" is the most overused line in movie history. But now I wonder if it might be the most overused line in real life. We all know what it feels like to be misunderstood, don't we? Today is week 2 in our series, Relatively Speaking. We're talking about the power of words and the way they impact the people we care about most. I mean, our words are incredibly powerful. Words have the power to bring healing and encouragement. Our words have the power to breathe new life to any relationship. But they also have the power to inflict tremendous pain. Who here has been in a situation where you wanted to say, "You just don't get it, do you?" I'll tell you what, quick show of hands, okay? Who has said that to someone? Who has already said that to someone today? Who needs me to repeat the question because you just didn't get it, did you? You see, in this series, we're looking at the book of Proverbs from the Old Testament. And Proverbs is full of all sorts of insight and wisdom delivered in just a few words or phrases at a time. It's one of the most practical books in the Bible. Each week, we're using the wisdom from Proverbs to help us discover a powerful word or phrase that could literally transform our relationships. Last week, we looked at the word no. And today, we're going to look at the phrase, "I understand." And to get that phrase locked in our hearts and minds, let's say it together on 3, okay? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. I understand. Very good. Now, the proverb we're looking at today is from chapter 18, verse 2. And it reads like this: "A fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in airing his own opinions." Sounds pretty harsh, doesn't it? But that's what I love about a proverb. I mean, it's so direct and just straight to the point. And the fool in Proverbs refers to someone who fails to take advantage of the wisdom and insight of others. I mean, this is a person who has all sorts of access to the experience and insights of the people around him, but never taps into it. In this case, you might say that the fool is someone who seems to have an open mouth, but a closed mind. He consistently insists on airing his own opinions, blurting out just whatever is on his mind rather than seeking to understand. It's as if he enjoys hearing his own voice so much that he just fails to take a break long enough to understand those around him. This proverb reminds me of Stephen Covey's famous quote, "Seek first to understand before seeking to be understood." You see, the fool insists on being understood and finds little or no value in seeking to understand. You know anybody like that? Think about it. I think I do. There's this guy I know who is an incessant talker. Now, I hate to admit it, but up until a few weeks ago, I would have said that he is the fool in this proverb. I mean, he never stops talking. You have to fight to find even the slightest break in the conversation just to fit in a phrase or two. You know anybody that's like that? It's pretty annoying, isn't it? So I decided I was going to have a conversation, a heart-to-heart with this person and tell him how he comes across. So one Sunday I said, "Dave Ferguson." No, I'm not telling the truth on that one. It wasn't really Dave this time. But I did say to this person, if you just give people a chance to talk, take a breath between sentences and not dominate the conversation so much, you might find that people actually want to talk to you more. You don't let anybody have a chance to say anything. Now, as soon as I said that, it was amazing. His demeanor changed. His speech slowed down. And he got really serious and he said to me, "Jon, the reason I talk so much on Sunday is that this is the only human contact I have in my entire week. The only people I get to converse with Monday through Saturday are the cashiers at the grocery store." As I listened, I understood that this guy had no family, no brothers or sisters, no children, no friends to talk to at all. And then he said, I'm afraid that if I don't keep talking, act happy and upbeat, then no one will talk to me at all. Here I was thinking that if I could just air my opinion, let him know how he comes across, then he would finally understand and change his ways. And while he does have some work to do, the real breakthrough came when I stopped talking and began to understand his story and his loneliness. I'm the one who had to stop playing the part of the fool. But isn't it hard to be someone who really listens to understand? And I think it's because so many of us have what I would call a faulty listening style. You know what it means to have a faulty listening style? Maybe you can relate to one of these. The first faulty listening style is the iPhoner. Yeah, the iPhoner. The iPhoner is the person who gives you very little, if any, eye contact at all. Why? Because we can't take our eye off our iPhone. Sometimes, we think we're being sly. We might, kind of hold it down here by our waist, or if we're at a table, we might put it underneath the table, or, we might try to be polite by saying, oh, just a minute, I gotta check something. That's not being polite. That's not paying attention to the person who's in front of you. That's the iPhoner. Or how about the interrupter? If you're this person, you're programmed to look for any slight pause in the conversation where you can jump in with your own opinion or idea. The interrupter is so busy thinking about what he wants to say next that he has no real idea what the other person is saying in the moment. Nobody does that here, right? Of course not. Now, here's another faulty listener. How about the problem solver? The problem solver. Now, for whatever reason, guys fall prey to this one often. But the ladies do too. But guys, for some reason, we think it's our responsibility to solve every little problem that's ever mentioned. And so often people just want to be heard and understood. Quick problem solver story. Dr. Ernesto Ceroli is one of the world's leading consultants on the topic of economic development. His first project in Africa was teaching people in Zambia how to grow tomatoes, zucchini, and other Italian favorites. And he said on this first project, instead of listening and asking the locals why they weren't growing anything, his team's attitude was more like, thank God we're here to show them how this can be done. Ceroli and his fellow aid workers were thrilled when the crops they planted by the river grew remarkably well. But just before it was time to harvest, the aid workers watched in horror as 200 hippopotamuses stormed out of the river and ate everything in sight. No one bothered to ask the locals why they weren't interested in growing food by the river. The problem solver loves to air his own opinions. Now, it's kind of funny to recognize ourselves in these faulty listening styles. But it's not so funny, is it, when our failure to understand creates distance and wreaks havoc on our relationships? See, I think we all know the damage our lack of understanding can do. But you know what? There is good news. The good news is that it's never too late to grow in this area. Never too late. And instead of playing the fool, we can learn to be wise in our relationships. A fool might find no pleasure in understanding, but a few verses later we read this. The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out. The wise person, the discerning heart, is on a quest to understand. You see, there actually is another learning style. We'll call the understander. The understander is consciously aware in their listening. The understander tries to put himself in the other person's shoes. The understander encourages others to talk and asks probing questions to learn more. And it all starts with the posture of the understander's heart. I mean, notice the proverb says it's about your heart. To be a good listener requires a certain heart, a certain orientation towards others. Stephen Covey says it like this. He says, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Think about that. Just take a step back for a moment and think about the posture of your heart in most conversations. What is your default intention? Is it to understand? Or is it to reply? Now, I think that's a pretty sobering question. Because when I ask it of myself, I realize that by default, I play the fool. Just the other day, I was thinking about a conversation I needed to have with someone at work about an issue we needed to resolve. And if I think about how I was preparing for that conversation, do you think my biggest concern was to understand the perspective of my coworker? No, not a chance. I was all about developing my argument, the points I was going to make to support my perspective and how I would respond to any and every objection that might come up. Never once did I stop to consider what value there might be in what the other person had to say. Clearly, I have no business teaching on this message, I understand. But you know what? I don't want to play the fool. And I know you don't either. The wise person, the discerning heart, is on a quest to understand. Jesus took the posture of the understander. There's a great story in Mark's account of Jesus' life where he and the disciples were traveling from town to town. And Jesus had become quite well known, quite popular, and a huge number of people crowded around him as he left a city called Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. Now, I can only imagine that it was hot, loud, and sort of a chaotic scene. And in the middle of all this commotion, a blind man named Bartimaeus is sitting by the side of the road begging when he hears that Jesus is about to pass by. "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me," he begins to shout. Now, the people near this man tell him to knock it off and be quiet. But undeterred, he shouts all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." You see, while everyone else wanted to shut him up and move along, Jesus stopped. He listened. And then he called for Bartimaeus to be brought to him. Now, I want to pause here for a minute and ask. Okay, if you are Jesus, what do you do next? A blind man jumps up and runs over to you. Okay, a blind man jumps up and runs over to you. If you're Jesus, what do? I know what I would do. I'm a problem solver. I would try that, spit on some mud and rub it in his eyes routine like I'd done before. I can so fix this. Let's go, right? Well, actually, if I was really in Jesus' place, I probably would have been so busy checking Facebook on my iPhone that I would have never even heard the guy screaming at me. But what Jesus does is so fascinating. What does he do? Look at that. He asks Bartimaeus a question. He asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?" A blind man is screaming for mercy. Blind man screaming for mercy. And Jesus asks, "What do you want me to do for you?" I think everyone standing there had a good idea what the blind man wanted. So why does Jesus ask the question? I think it's because Jesus has this wise and discerning heart of the understander. Jesus doesn't just assume. He doesn't just act. He listens with the intent to understand. He gives the man a chance to speak his heart, and then the man says to Jesus, "Rabbi, I want to see." Our proverb says, "The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out." So the question is, how can we learn to be more like that? How can we become the understander? I once read that the difference between the sense of hearing and the skill of listening is attention. So one practical step we can take to become an understander is to remove the barriers that vie for our attention. How often do you hear somebody talking without really listening to what they're saying? Words are being spoken, but what we hear is what Charlie Brown hears when his teacher speaks, right? Wah, 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 okay? And why? Why does that happen? Because we let too much compete for our attention. Too many barriers. The TV, the task at hand, my smartphone. When Jesus heard the man crying out, he made the crowd move aside. He silenced the people who were telling the guy to shut up. And he asked the man to come over so that he could listen to him face to face. Jesus removed the barriers. And you see, one step we can take to become a better understander is to remove the barriers that keep us from paying attention. Now, when it comes to faulty listening habits, I am an iPhoner for sure. Anybody else? I constantly let that little device come between me and the people I most want to understand. And I know who is most important. It's the person I'm with, not the person trying to text me in the moment. But I still let this little phone get in the way. You know, it's not just me. I'm raising a couple of iPhoners. I have an 18-year-old iPhoner and a 15-year-old iPhoner. You can imagine what it's like to get their attention. So sometimes when we go out to eat, we'll stack our iPhones in the middle of the table, and we agree that the first person to touch their phone in the middle of the table has to pick up the tab or pay each of us $1. Actually works pretty well. I mean, the last thing either one of my high schoolers wants is to pay for dinner. I'm not sure why that works for me. I pay for it anyway. You want to be an understander? Or remove the barriers that stand in the way. All right, second practical step. Stop interrupting. Stop interrupting. Ever watch CNN or maybe another news station when the anchor puts like 2 or 3 people on the screen at the same time to discuss a particular topic? There's no real dialogue. It's just 2 monologues going on at the same time. I mean, it's all about who can get the most airtime. But you know what? We do that to each other, don't we? In our conversations, I mean, we fight for airtime. So I'll tell you what, this week, be intentional and notice just how often you interrupt. And interrupting starts with seeking to be understood rather than seeking to understand. We all know how it works. You know, somebody will be talking to you and they'll say something that triggers a thought in your mind. And then you get preoccupied with what you want to say next. And then we interrupt instead of truly seeking to understand what the person is saying. James, the brother of Jesus, urges us to be what? Quick to listen and slow to speak. We get that backwards, don't we? We tend to be quick to speak and slow to listen. Back to Jesus and Bartimaeus. You know, while everyone else was interrupting Bartimaeus, telling him to be quiet, Jesus was quick to listen. He had a discerning heart and wise ears. He sought to understand. Finally, a last step we all can take. Ask questions. Ask questions. Pretty simple, right? But ask questions that help deepen your understanding. You know, don't just assume that you know what a person is trying to say. Jesus didn't assume. He looked at this blind man and asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" You know, my son, Graham, was playing Park District basketball. I would coach his teams. Tons of fun. And he had some really good teams when he was growing up. You know, great coaching will do that for you. And there were times, we would be putting a pounding on our opponent. And at some point, I would call a timeout and put a 3-pass rule into play. I'd pull the guys together and I'd say, okay, you know what? We're way ahead. Now I want you to pass the ball 3 times before you take a shot. It was really the only way I knew to slow them down so we didn't, run up the score. Well, what if in our conversations we put in a 3-question rule? Yeah, 3-question rule. Ask 3 questions before taking your shot. Ask 3 questions to help you have a discerning heart. Ask 3 questions so that we can have wise ears. Asking questions helps us slow down so we can genuinely say, I understand. I understand. The wisdom of Proverbs says that the real path to transforming relationships is to find pleasure in understanding. Seeking to understand before seeking to be understood. The incarnation, which is Jesus coming to earth as one of us, was God saying to us, I understand. I understand. With his wise and discerning heart, everywhere Jesus went, he brought togetherness, love, and understanding. And one of the greatest gifts we can give to our friends, our family, our coworkers is the gift of understanding. There just aren't many places people can go anymore where they truly feel understood. Just imagine the impact we could have on our families, on our neighborhoods, on our cities, if people said that about us. If they said, wow, that church there, those people, that community of faith, they listen. They understand. They get me. What a gift that would be.